The 10 pounds of rice is finished and the machine's defrosted after that. So here's the water from the 10 pounds of rice, about 3/4 of a gallon. And now we'll get it set for the next thing. Next thing's going to be another batch out of the freezer, just to try to empty that freezer a little bit more. So we'll get everything set and get it pre-cooling. I'm going to let it pre-cool while I go for my walk. So it'll be more than a half hour before I come back to it and get it filled. Okay, I do want to make sure that there's a ring all the way around it. You can use the little palette knife and just give it a little twist in between the machine and the seal until I see that ring all the way around it. Okay, good. Now I've got a ring completely around there. I don't have to worry about air getting through there and creating a ice spot all the way around there. So as soon as I get back from the walk, we'll get over to the freezer, find what we're going to put in here and get it going. Right now, I'll get it started. I need to remember to mention this more. Our machine is from 2017. We're using an old version of firmware, which I'm really happy with and had no interest in upgrading. I'm using Kustomize every time so that I get more data on screen while it's running. I use Kustomize on all of them, and then it gives you a chance right here to change the shelf temperatures, and also if you want to adjust the cycle times. So I've got mine set for a 6-hour freeze and then an 11-hour final dry. The part between the freeze and the final dry on this older version is 30 hours of the main dry cycle, and that's not adjustable. It's when it senses that it's dry enough, it thinks it's going to be dry enough, then it jumps any remaining of that 30 hours, it'll jump past it and go to the final dry. So it's 30 hours maximum and then to the final dry. So I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to go back to, and then I'm going to put Start Custom and Continue. And I'll make sure the drain valve is closed. It says it's 67 degrees in there. When I get back from my walk, we'll go over to the freezer, find out what's going to go in here, and get them loaded onto trays. The trays are also in the freezer pre-cooling, so that they'll be nice and cold. Everything will be cold when I put it in there. I don't want to put the food in there until the freeze dryer is at least as cold as the food that I'm putting in there. The freezers are between -5 and 5 Fahrenheit, and by the time I get them loaded onto trays and get them in here, usually they're about 10 degrees. So I want to make sure that the freeze dryer is 10 degrees or lower before I put things in there. Okay, so don't go away. We'll be right back over at the freezer. The freeze dryer is plenty cold now. The walk took not too long, but then I was doing some other stuff. So it's been pre-cooling for at least a couple hours now. It's very cold now. We'll get the food in there. We're using more food blocks out of the freezer. And you've seen before, I like to pre-freeze my food in blocks. That way they're pre-measured out. They're ready to go on the trays. And I can get a lot of them in the freezer that way. And the little pans are really inexpensive, so it's easy to have quite a few of them. Use them, pop the food out, put them in Ziplocs, and then refill them again. Let's find out what we have in there. Okay, so have the freeze dryer pans up there pre-cooling. We'll get those out of there. And I've got some pans of food waiting to be popped out of the pans, and I just haven't done it yet. So it's more refried beans and a bunch of the half pans. So each full pan is a pound, each half side is a half pound. That way they're ready to use. They're pre-measured for bagging or for portioning into bags. So I'm going to do some more rice. Let's see, I still have two full blocks of rice and 4 half blocks. So that gives me the equivalent of 4, and I've got room for 6 more. Here's some chili. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks of chili. So perfect. The combination will fill it up perfectly. We'll get the trays loaded and into the freeze dryer. I'm going to use parchment paper on them as normal, or as I usually do. And getting the tear weight of the tray. And then I'm going to use the 2 big blocks of rice first. So these were a little bit bigger. These were 500-gram blocks, and so these are older ones. Yeah, so I better make a note that these were 500 grams before they were put into the freezer, because then they do lose a little bit of water or weight in the freezer. So each of these were 500 grams. And I'll add one of the half blocks, and that was a ½ pound. The ½ pound and full pound are the ones that I did while doing the 50 batch series. Usually I would do 500 grams because it's easier to do the math. But it does overload the freeze dryer if you put the full tray, so I just used 2 of them. $19.58 for that tray. And then I'll come back and add thermometers. And these look like they were cooked without chicken broth, I'm thinking. And then one of the ½ pound blocks of rice to go with it. So that's $18.44 for that tray. And I'll know that these were 1 pound each and this was a ½ pound. So for bagging, I can just weigh what's left and know how much water goes in each one of them. Tray 3. More chili on this one. And another one of the blocks of rice. $18.81. And finally, tray 4. Okay, and the 2 pounds of chili. And finally, that last ½ pound block of rice, $18.52. Now, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to get thermometers in there because of the big height difference. Not sure how I'm going to do that. So we'll give that a look. I have to drill through the rice to get to that, or I could spin it around and go just in the chili. That works. That'll be in there, and that'll tell us the temperature of the food, which is only really important when I want to take it out, to make sure that it's warm enough so that it won't have condensation on it when I take it out. Okay, that's deep enough. Three down. Finally, the rice. So get the extra chili off the drill bit. So it won't hurt to have a bit of chili in with the rice. And this rice might have been cooked just plain. I do not remember. That's from quite a while back. The bag says it was with chicken broth, but it must have just been less of the chicken broth. Now we'll go get those into the freeze dryer. So these are ready to go into the freeze dryer. We've got 6 pounds of chili and 4 pounds of rice cooked with chicken broth. Actually, it's a little bit more than 4 because these were 500 gram blocks. So this is 1 kilo. So there's 2.2 pounds here plus another ½ pound. Almost 2 3/4. So it's a little bit higher than that. It's been pre-freezing for almost 3 hours now because, you know, got sidetracked. The thermometer underneath says lower than 40 below, and the display says -6 or 46. So 46 below. It's cold. Let's get the food in. And you can see almost instantly you get some condensation on here, and that's what would happen if you pull your trays out with the food on it and it's that cold. You'll get condensation on your trays and on your food. You'll be putting water back in immediately. It's not a huge amount, but you don't want any of it, so that's why I like the thermometers in the food. It tells me ahead of time if the food is warm enough to safely take out without having to worry about condensation. So now we'll get those in there. And this is actually a fairly big batch because the extra rice on the one tray. So it's almost 10 1/4 pound batch. Okay, I want to make sure I get that seal ring around there right away, so I know that it's sealed and not leaking air while it finishes the freezing process. So I'm using my little palette knife and giving it a little twist in that gap to help push that seal out up against the door. All right, now I have a complete ring around there. I don't have to worry about the ring icing up as it continues freezing. So again, this is a fairly good sized batch with a lot of rice. We'll be back in a couple of days and check on it and see how it's doing. Don't go away, it'll be just a second for you. The batch of Chilean rice is waiting for me. I'd written down the numbers last night when I knew that it was going to finish during the night. It was about 37 3/4 hours when it was going to finish. And that was going to be putting it at like 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning. So I added an additional 3 hours at that time to give it extra dry time, thinking that I might be able to get to it by then. I didn't. So now it's been sitting here cooling for 7 hours after all of that extra time. So the total freeze dry time so far is about 40 3/4 hours. But it's about 47 1/2 hours right now on here. Anyway, we'll need to warm them up before we take them out and check them and weigh them. The warmest tray is the top one, and it's about -30 it says. The bottom one says -50. If I take them out, first I'm going to need gloves or I'm going to hurt myself. And second, they're going to have condensation on them instantly. Yeah, all the moisture that touches those is going to condense right away. So I'm going to warm them up until the thermometers in the food say at least 60 to 80 degrees. And then we'll take them out, weigh them and put them back in for a couple hours to see if they're actually dry already. So let's get it rewarmed a bit and we'll see what the display says the temperature is. Again, on this machine, this is a 2017 machine using the older firmware. And on this one, the temperature probe, the thermistor is near the back of the tray on the bottom of the second shelf up. It's near the bottom. If you look in there, at least if you have this model, there'll be a little bump under there that's different than the other ones, unless the newer ones have more than one temperature probe on them. Anyway, so that's where it's checking the temperature. And you can see there's a little bit of condensation on here, but not bad considering how cold it is on the other side of the plastic. It is still under vacuum because the oil type vacuum pump has a check valve, and so it doesn't let the pressure back in. I can tell that some pressure is leaked in there because the seal ring isn't as wide as it would be when it's under the full vacuum. But it's still under a good amount of vacuum, so you're not having a lot of heat transfer out here anyway. And then with that extra disc that I put in there, that just gives it another layer, which again probably doesn't make any difference when it's under vacuum because there's no air for conduction.
Yeehaw!
No, for conduction through the air or convection. So you only have the heat transfer either radiant, which would be going in because it's so much hotter out here, or through the edge of the barrel coming out here, which is why I have the silver insulation on the outside, is to help insulate that little gap that's along here. Anyway, let's get it warmed up and get it checked. So I'm just going to add more dry time because this older model doesn't have warm trays. It just has more dry time, which works for what I'm after. The drain valve is still closed, and it says that it's -58 in there. Okay, so as soon as that's warmed up a bit, we'll come back and, well, as soon as the thermometers in the food say it's warmed up, we'll come back and check it. Let's see if we can show one of the thermometers. There's the bottom thermometer, just about 50 below zero. We'll be back in a few minutes. It's about 25 minutes later. All the trays are above 70 now. So, and that's the food inside the trays. The display on the machine says that they're over 90, but they're not that high yet because I need to know the center of the food. Okay, so now we'll bypass the rest of the time, open the drain valve, and take them out. And because it's in the final dry time, it has the up and down arrow, and I can add or subtract time. So I'll just subtract the time until I get down to zero. That'll stop the machine, but it keeps the freeze unit running. I'm leaving the freezing unit running, but I'll open the drain valve now. Opening the drain valve to let the pressure in so it'll equalize so I can open it. Otherwise, with the vacuum in there, this is being pushed on there with 15 pounds per square inch. So now we can get it open. Well, gotta turn the handle. Okay, and starting at tray 1. And then I am going to rotate the position of the trays when I put them back in. Tray 1, 1183. Tray 2, 1028. And then we'll switch those positions. I'll put tray 2 up at the top. I'm going to put tray 1 down a spot. Okay, tray 3. 1028, 1027, 1027. It's bouncing between 27 and 28, so I chose the 27. And tray 4, 1033. So put tray 4 up a spot and tray 3 down a spot. And then we'll get the disc back in place. And since it's going to be under vacuum right away, the disc probably doesn't have any real value. Its main value, I think, is when it's cooling at the beginning, but without a vacuum, because then you have a lot of cold in there and it gives it another insulating layer. Okay. And since we're going to restart the vacuum right away, I'm not going to worry about the gaps in the seal because that'll be taken care of right away. So I've closed the drain valve. Now we'll give it more time. I'll press more dry time. I did close the drain valve. I'm not worried about the pump being warm because I've got the cooling fan on it. And then I'm going to go at least 3 hours because I have a few other things to do, so I probably won't be able to make it in 2 hours. So I'll restart it. Now it's sealed. And I'm going to add to the time. I'm going to go 3 1/4 hours. Well, I'll just go ahead and go 4 hours because I can bypass any extra if I need to or if I'm available. So we'll come back and check it in a while, make sure it was already dry. If it doesn't lose any weight, then it's already dry now. In fact, it was already dry before it was rewarmed. But I won't know that until I check it for the weight after this time. If it does drop weight during this time, then I'll add more time until it stops losing weight. Okay, we'll be back in a while. Don't go away, it'll be just a second. All right, it's 4 hours later because I didn't come down and take care of this earlier. It's in the last couple of minutes, so I'm gonna get them out and check them. If they didn't lose any weight, that means they were dry 4 hours ago or more, and we'll use the old time, not the time showing now, as the amount of time it took to dry. And so let's get them out and check them. In a minute it will turn itself off, but I'm going to go ahead and hit the down arrow to get past the last of that. And I'm going to assume it's going to be done, so I'm going to turn off the oil pump filter system and the fan for that. Okay, next, open the drain valve. All right, and starting with tray 1. So it was 1883 and it's 1881, so it did go down a little bit during those 4 hours. Let's see, how much product is on there? It'll be 250, 350, a little more than 350, 2 grams. It's not massive. Okay, if that's similar to all of them, I'll probably go ahead and take it out because it's been 4 hours and it's only 2. In fact, it's even jumping up the next one higher, so it's only 1 and apart. So let's check the others. Oh yeah, I forgot. Most of them weren't even rice. The chili probably has less of an issue. Yes, 1028, so no change on that. Tray 3. 1027, no change. And tray 4, 1033. Okay, and it's down just a fraction. The rice and chili lost almost nothing. The one tray was less than 2 grams because it was bouncing up to the next number. So it's somewhere between 1 and 2 grams. Then one of the other trays lost a part of a gram. So basically in 4 hours, I'm fine with that. I'm gonna go ahead and shut this off. We'll go get them moved to the bagging table and come back and get the time and the power usage. So I'm gonna hit no defrost. God, that always amazes me how quick. And let me mention that again. I've mentioned it before. If somebody says that these are about the noise level of a dishwasher, either they've got their head inside the dishwasher or they seriously need to consider a new dishwasher, because this would be the loudest dishwasher. Well, maybe not the loudest I've ever used, because I've run commercial dishwashers before. This would be similar to a commercial dishwasher. It's nothing like a home dishwasher. Nobody would put up with anything like this sitting in their kitchen. It's way too loud in comparison to a dishwasher. It's not too loud if you have it in a different room, which is where we have it. It doesn't seem to, the sound doesn't seem to travel out very well. So as long as we close the door, it's not too much of a problem. One of the rooms we use is directly above us, no issue at all. You know, and even when you go into the next room here without a door closed, it's significantly better. But if you go in the next room with the door closed, it's fine. But it's not dishwasher quiet unless you've got the noisiest. I mean, I literally have never heard a home dishwasher sound anywhere close to this. Anyway, it's not like a dishwasher. Don't let anybody fool you. Got the baffle in place. Pull the thermometer out of the ice from underneath and get my little defrost fan in place. And you can just use the defrost cycle on it, which you'll shut the doors and it'll turn on the heated trays or the heated shelves and warm it all up and drain it out. It will take considerably more power than this, but it will be quick. If you do that, make sure you remember when you're done to open that door and get it dry. Otherwise, you've made a nice, warm, moist area for mold and mildew. Okay, we'll get that. I'll turn that on after we come back and get the power use and the time. The display is showing a little over 52 hours on here, but I know that it was setting 7 hours while it was waiting in the night. And then the rewarm this morning, and now more than 4 hours additional. So I had only about 41 hours and then all the additional. It did lose a teeny bit on one of the trays, so I'm going to just estimate that it would have been about 42 hours and disregard this part of it. Okay, and now the power usage. So the power usage is showing 32.06 kilowatt hours. In reality, the food was done before probably 30 or less, because it was running at least 10 extra hours. And with the heaters and the vacuum pump and everything, and the cooling unit, so it would be significantly less than that. But I'm gonna just go ahead and write that down. It's kind of a worst case scenario. So then I'll reset it and get it ready for the next one. The 6 pounds of chili and the little bit more than 4 pounds of rice is out and done and ready for weighing and bagging. Those two blocks were 500 grams each, so they're a little bit heavier than 1 pound, and that's fine. That's what we used to do. All of ours was 500 grams because it's easy. We should probably do 400 grams so that it doesn't overload the water capability of the freeze dryer. Now we'll get these all weighed without the thermometers, and we'll get the final weights and know how much they weigh now, and then we'll get them bagged. I did weigh everything before we put them on the trays to begin with, so we know that each one of these blocks, when we dished them out, was 1 pound, and these little blocks are a ½ pound, except the two big rice ones were 500 grams. So it's 1,020 on that one. 1,019 on that one. And 1,025 on that one. I already have some of the bags labeled. I've got the batch number on the bag in case I lose the label. And then on the labels, I've got batch number, what it is, the date it went into the freeze dryer, what it weighed before it was freeze dried, and then I'll add how much water is needed to each bag. Because again, we know that these were 1 pound and these were a ½ pound, except the one set of rice. Weighing the blocks of food and then calculating out how much they lost, so weighing them before and after, is not required. My sister doesn't bother with weighing them really before bagging or before freeze drying or after, with the exception of she kind of weighs them before just so that she doesn't overload the tray. And she kind of weighs them after to kind of get the bags even. But she doesn't really care how much, and she doesn't worry about the water needed. She just rehydrates it with whatever feels right at the time. So if she wants a thicker soup, she puts in less water. If she wants a thinner soup, she puts in more water. Vegetables and meats tend to only soak up what they really need, so she doesn't worry about that either. She just puts in some and then drains it afterwards. One of the reasons I really started to track this is because the viewers asked. They asked, how much water do you need to put back in? Well, it's simply weighing the block before you put it in, weighing it after, subtracting, and what that difference is, that's how much water it needs to be put back in, approximately. Usually I'll put in a little bit less to start with and see if that's enough. There's a lot of things take a while to absorb all that water, so we'll get them bagged. When you put stuff in the freezer to pre-freeze, unless you have it sealed, it's usually going to lose a little bit of moisture in the freezer. That's why things get freezer burn, because they lose too much water and they start to get dry around the edges. These had already lost about 2/10 of a pound total for this whole set. This batch was about 10 pounds before it was freeze dried. It would have been 10.2 before it went into the freeze dryer. After it was freeze dried, it weighed 1,246 grams, which is a little over 2 pounds, 2.5 pounds. And it lost 3,296 grams of water. So total, that's how much water needs to be put back in. But since I know how much each block is, I'll just weigh it in the bag and write it on the bag then. I'm going to start with the rice. And these two blocks were 500 grams each. I'm going to use one of the little flexible cutting mats to make sure that I can keep each piece separate. Now let's see if we can get one of them off of there without them kind of breaking apart. Oh, that's not going to happen. That rice is really loose pieces. So I'm going to try to get this one. That's going to be a problem. Okay. Well, I'm going to hope it's going to fit in there. So I'm going to get the bag ready. Going to zero the scale out to take into account the tare weight of this bag and label. And then I'm going to try to get all the rice from that block into the bag. I don't know how that's going to work. Because that's really coming apart. Yeah, so nice and loose grains, just like minute rice. Some batches of rice seem to stick together much more than others, and I know a lot of it has to do with the chicken broth that I use. So if I use a heavier broth when I make it, they stick together more. And probably if I overcook them, they'll do the same thing, get sticky rice. Okay, that's not bad. That worked pretty well. That was 500 grams of rice, and now it's 179. So 500 minus 179 equals 321 grams of water. I'm going to just put that it needs 320. I'm going to round it to the 320. So water lost, 320 grams. Oh, and I've been reminded to mention, because I always forget, that for water, grams of water is also equal to milliliters of water. So grams, cubic centimeter, and milliliters are all the same when it comes to water. So if your measuring cup has milliliters, 230 or 320 milliliters of water would be what this would need. I always forget about that because I use a scale. I don't measure it out in a measuring cup. I use a scale and weigh my water when I'm putting back in. Okay, we'll get this block ready. We'll get the other 500 gram block in there. And ideally, this one should come out very similar to the other one. Well, you can see how it's just breaking apart as I move the scoop under it. Scoop! There's another thing I forget about. This scoop, I didn't buy it this way. I bought this scoop off of Amazon, and it had curved pieces kind of like this on it, and I cut the ends off and glued new ends on that I 3D printed. I also tried it with taking the piece that got cut off, because somebody asked about it. If you take those pieces and then, because they have a curve to them, but you can warm them up either like in an oven, or hot sand would be perfect, or with a heat gun, or over your toaster or something. Anyway, if you warm them up, then you can flatten them out and they'll still fit in this space close enough that you can sand them and then glue them back on. And I just use acetone as a solvent to glue these on. Anyway, I forget to mention that too, that this scoop, it fits great in here, but it did not come like this. I adjusted it to fit there. And I could have even done a little bit better perhaps by leaving these angled out to match the slope of the tray. Oops, better not try that, it'll pour it back out. People have mentioned also more than once, why not just store the uncooked rice? Because all I'm doing is essentially making minute rice. But I get to put the flavors in it that I like up front. As far as regular uncooked rice, I see no point on storing that in my freeze-dried stuff, because let's say you have 50 pounds of uncooked rice. Okay, in an emergency, you have perhaps, what if you're in a situation where you have no electricity, you can't make a fire, you have no stove that's functioning? How are you going to cook it to eat it? This is already cooked. I could eat it dry. In fact, it's quite delicious. But I could also just heat up some warm water if I have heat. But if I don't, I can just pour cold water in it and it's still going to work well. It's going to just take a little longer to rehydrate. Now, 2 of these blocks will give me 1 pound. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer one of these blocks into the other one. And these were cooked with a different chicken broth and are considerably more solid than that last set was. And these were 1 pound, which is a little bit more than 453 grams. So I'll use 453 grams to subtract out. Oh, I forgot to write how much water this one needs. See how similar it is. So it's very similar. It's only about 5 grams different than the other one. So I'm going to go ahead and still just put 320. I'll just round it off to a nice even number. Okay, now this one. Now this one, I'm going to have to break these up a little bit, because I don't want to damage the grains of rice really, but I do want to get them apart well enough so that they'll fit in the bag. So that needs just over 310 grams, so 313. I'm going to just round it down to 310. And if I end up with a grain or 2 of rice in with the chili, it won't hurt anything. All right, 140 grams. So essentially the same as that last one. So again, I'm going to round that off to just 310. So I've got my bags marked, and I used rounded this one to 310 grams and this one to 320 grams. And as I mentioned, that would be milliliters, and I probably should be writing milliliters on there in case people have a measuring cup when they go to use these. I'm going to try something a little different with this chili for breaking it up. Usually I put on a glove and then gently break it up because I don't want to damage the beans or the chunks of meat. I just want to kind of break up the sauce. But this time I'm going to try putting it in a Ziploc and doing that. 1 pound of chili. Yeah, I don't know if that gives me the same feel and control. Oh, that looks good though. Because it doesn't have to be broken up all the way to get it into the bag. I just need to be able to kind of pour it in there. You can see the nice big chunks of beans and things. I don't want to break up any of those. Yeah, I think a glove works easier though. Well, I'll give that a try. Well, that worked. That worked out well. So it needs approximately 350 grams of water. Well, I don't think this method was any faster. So I don't think using a Ziploc was any faster, but it was neater. It was less messy. So I'm going to go ahead and try that again. Okay, well that worked out really well, starting at one end and just working my way down. You can see I've got nice chunks of onions and beans, another bean, a chunk of the meat. Yeah, so I don't want to powder anything. I just want to break it up enough to be able to get it into the bag. And that's close enough to the same. I'll just put the same. Definitely makes me want some chili. By putting them in the bag, that worked out pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and keep doing it that way. Now, I'm going to try that again, just kind of work from one side. I'm just kind of squishing it lightly like that. And it seems to be enough to break up the sauce. And it doesn't seem to be crushing the beans or the chunks of meat or the onions. The chili and rice are all bagged in 1 quart bags, and these are our 1 quart bags from a while ago. So these 1 quart bags don't actually hold a quart. They only hold about 3/4 of a quart, about 24 ounces. We'll be switching to the new ones after a while, but we've still got a fair amount of 1 quart ones left before we get there. So we've got 4 bags of the rice and 6 bags of the chili. And in all of those, I'm going to be adding a 300 cc oxygen absorber and then zipper them shut and seal them. So I'm going to tuck this down alongside the food to make sure that I don't end up with it in the seal area or the zipper. I'm going to press out any extra air that I can. If there's any space at the top, I'll press out any extra air. These are pretty full. So not really any space to push out any extra. And the oxygen absorbers start to work fairly quickly, so you want to work pretty quick to get them zippered shut and then sealed. The oxygen absorbers we've been getting come in packs of 10. I don't do more than 10 at a time, so if I've got 20 bags, I'll do 10 of them, seal them, and then come back and get the next 10 so that they're not sitting in here absorbing oxygen out of the air, out of this room. And now the heat sealing. These zippers are quite good, but they're not a substitute for heat sealing them. So I'm going to seal as high up on the bag as I can get. I can get this out of the way for a minute. So trying to make sure that I've got a nice smooth bag across the top and getting it high along the top to give myself space for more. Gives myself space for 2 or 3 more tries if this one has a problem, or if I want to cut it open. There, nice and high. In fact, it could have been a little bit higher, but it's got a good seal. And on this first bag, I like to do it twice. So in the first bag, I like to do it twice to make sure it's all up to temperature. And I've got a nice wide seal at the top. Everything's sealed nicely. You can see on both sides. And that's ready for storage after I add a gross weight of this bag. So we'll get them all sealed first. Some of the older bags we had didn't have this little tear notch. Even with this tear off notch, I find it very difficult to tear these sometimes. And without that notch, I just had to cut a spot in it. I just couldn't tear these 7mm bags. So the last thing I do before I put them in the bins for storage is I put a gross weight on each bag. probably completely unnecessary. 164. But we did have some bad thin bags a couple of years ago, and they actually got about 4% heavier right through the bag. And if it's bouncing between two numbers, I'll pick the higher number. That way I won't be unnecessarily alarmed later if I see a small increase, because I'll already have put that on there. All right, those are ready to go into the storage bins. The rice and the chili from batch 569 are done and ready to go into a bin. I'm going to use bin 6 from the first 50 batch series. There's still room in this one, and we're trying to find out how many would have actually fit in the 8 bins that we used. Another batch going into a bin. Let's move it over and get them in. Yeehaw! So bin 6 still had a fair amount of space on top after all of its batches. And on top of this is white bean chicken chili. So we're going to be adding rice and regular chili. White bean chicken chili is really good with rice also, so this will go well together. Got our 4 bags of rice and our 6 bags of chili. Now, that bin looks much more full now. So that's a 7th batch into this bin. So that'd be approximately 70 pounds of food before it is dried. So one of these bins can hold a lot of stuff. So as soon as the freeze dryer is defrosted, we'll get on to the next batch. And the trays, the little pans are really expensive. And the little pans are really inexpensive. All right, so they lost rice and chili.